Hi everybody. It was great reading your comments and reactions and discussions on the forum number 4 that dealt with the UN headquarters and the question of does it matter where the headquarters is located, and since it has been in New York City for over 70 years, should we relocate it or move it to a different place? And what I found very, very interesting is that there were patterns of agreement and of course some disagreements between you. But overall, you seem to have a consensus over some items. So if I was just counting your reply to the first question, many of you did not think that it really matters where the UN headquarters is located. Now, that doesn't mean that when you further read your comments, it did not mean that you really didn't care, but that you thought that there was no real need to even discuss it, especially right now. But having said that, when we move on to the next question about relocation or the possibility of relocation, there was a clear split between those of you who wanted to live it in New York City and those of you who thought that it should be relocated or at least considered relocation. For those of you who did not believe that the headquarters should move, those who wanted to leave it in New York City, there were a bunch of arguments in support of that position. One of the first one was something along the lines, and I think one of you basically said that if it's not broken, there's no need to fix it. There's no need for a change. Has been in New York City. There's no evidence that that has any impact or negative impact on the operation of the UN. So why change? And then to top that, it will be a logistical hassle. And there has been a lot of money invested in building and renovating and maintaining the UN headquarters and all the facilities that are related to it in New York City. Many of you thought that New York City is a great location for a headquarters like that because there is great exposure. It's a large city, a very well-known city, a city that people look to, where there is a lot of cultural, economic, and political action taking place all the time. It is accessible, diverse, and safe. Now, on the 2 points of safety and accessibility, I just want to kind of poke you guys on these points, because safety, let's not forget, the September 11, 2001 attacks and other threats and possible attacks. Now, of course, no place around the world is completely safe, but we do have a certain bias when it comes to looking on our own ability to guarantee safety. I think we can. I'm just not thinking that it's such a slam dunk and that's, New York City is a safe place or the safest place around the world. In terms of accessibility, some things that we as US citizens or people who have permit to get to the United States, even if you're not citizens, kind of tend to forget that it's not that easy to get into the United States. And since New York City is in the United States, if somebody is unable to get a visa, then they just cannot come here. And so even in terms of accessibility, there are some limitations. In addition to that, something that we all deal with every day, the transportation into and out of New York City, including the airports that serve the city, are really not great and are somewhat dated. And so if we think about accessibility in terms of the place that is very easy to get to, maybe that's not New York City. I'm just suggesting some point for thought. The next line of argument was about how the USA is an important and active member of the UN. It's one of the permanent 5 members. Some of you said that even if we are relocating, it should still stay within a permanent a P5 member and not in any other location. And again, I just want to point some critical thoughts here, and that the United States is a powerful nation state. But in terms of activism in the UN and in terms of how much we are providing for the institution and for its activities, it's not always that great. Yes, the US pays the most dues to the UN when we pay them. There are years that we don't pay them. We are involved in almost every agency of the United Nations, but not always in the most supportive way. And the United States has come under a lot of criticism that it tries to use the UN as a place for power politics instead of what it arguably should be, an equal forum of representation for all countries. In addition to that, there were some of you who voiced kind of parochial concerns to New York City itself, right? What would it mean if the UN will pull out its headquarters from New York City, both in terms of message, but also in terms of economic activity and political vitality of the city. And then if we move on to those of you who thought that, yeah, maybe it is time to relocate the UN headquarters, you mostly voiced concerns about the message of the UN headquarters being permanently in New York City and the representation or lack thereof, and suggested that it might be a better message to open it up to other countries, and it will provide for better representation when it comes to the location of the headquarters. Others pointed to the fact that most of the activity and engagement of the UN and UN agencies does not happen in the United States. It happens elsewhere in the world, and so why is the headquarters located in the United States or in New York City? Maybe, some of you suggested, it should be located closer to where most of the activity and action takes place. So think about Africa, Southeast Asia, Middle East, somewhere along these lines. It was interesting that aside from pointing to a couple of European capitals or European cities, so Geneva, where we already have a hub for the UN. Some of you thought that maybe that should be the next place for a headquarters, and Vienna, Austria. So aside of naming those two places, many of you have said, yes, we probably should relocate, but there wasn't a precise location of where should the UN headquarters move to. Another idea that surfaced and was liked by a number of you was this idea of maybe the UN should not have a sitting permanent headquarters, but instead have some kind of a rotating arrangement that would host meetings of both the General Assembly and the Security Council or any other body and agency, or just a more kind of a decentralized, spread around model that would only require a location for the annual meeting, and that can be, I think some of you have used the analogies of the Olympic Games or the World Cup, something along these lines, where different cities, different countries might be able to apply to host the next meeting, and it would just kind of move around the world this way. Another kind of idea or concern that came up from your replies was that perhaps the question is not best presented to students who live in New York City, but perhaps this should be kind of a survey that presents to member states. And if there is enough will or enough push to relocate their headquarters, then yeah, let's go ahead and do it. The only problem with that is that if there is no real criteria or process or decision, how do we know that member states will not go around and decide to relocate the headquarters every other year or something along these lines? And that can create a lot of instability and, of course, logistical and financial burden on the whole organization. So all in all, if you haven't spent a lot of time reading, I would encourage you to go back and read, because this was a really good discussion. I liked how you built on different threads, and there were many great ideas in there. So now, in the next few weeks, when we learn more about the UN and other international organizations and international law, you might have this question on the headquarters kind of poking in the back of your head when you are getting a better understanding of how this whole international governance process works.